The mind is this infinitely flexible thing. And we get born with a bunch of habits, a bunch of tendencies. Tendency to be kind or jealous or angry. You know, for example, a friend of mine talked about her little boy. From the time he was tiny, he first went fishing. Well, he fell in love with fishing. She didn't like fishing. She didn't know any logic why he liked fishing. But you could argue from the Buddhist perspective, he had a tendency to kill. Not being mean. Fishing's called killing, you know. Another little boy, my friend Daichen in Queensland, she talked about how when her boy was 3 years old and he's taking the lice out of his head. And he's crying with compassion for the lice. Mommy, leave them alone. It's their home. Don't hurt them. Doing everything he could to stop her harming the lice in his own head. Now, I mean, she was gobsmacked. She hadn't had time to teach him this. So you go, oh, where does that come from? We see this repeatedly. We see evidence of extraordinary behaviour in some children. I mean, what about the kids who play music? I mean, you go on YouTube now, I can't believe my eyes. Do you understand? 3-year-olds playing Bach. I mean, think, where does this come from? Okay, this is all the karmic one. I didn't want to go there. But we can see, since we're tiny, whatever your reasoning is, we can see we've got lots of little habits, you know, and they feel so natural. So because they feel natural, because you didn't have to be taught it, then we concretize it. Whereas the Buddha's saying, yes, they're natural, they're deep habits, but you can change them. But this is, again, one of the stumbling blocks. Because for me, you know, the Buddhist view, I've been trying to work with it quite a few years. I take it seriously. I like the Buddhist approach. And I also, hopefully, try to put my money where my mouth is. If I'm talking about it, if I don't try to practice this stuff, I'm a complete phony, you know. That's really inappropriate, isn't it? I should dare not talk to you about it. But I am doing my best, I promise. I have confidence in this model. I enjoy these teachings, and I try to do it. So I can say with certainty, when I first heard the Buddhist teachings, I really liked the approach, the view of the mind, how it's all these things I'm telling you. But I can say to you, it was many years before I had any taste of confidence that anger wasn't my middle name. Do you understand? Anger being an example, just an example. It felt so natural, so spontaneous, that it just seemed like it was naturally who I was, even though intellectually I had the Buddha's view that says it isn't. But there's a big gap between knowing the theory, isn't it, and then having the experience, which is why we have to have a lot of patience with ourselves. So for me, I had confidence in it intellectually, but it took me a long time, and I can almost remember the moment when some shift had occurred for the first time, when I began to realize it was not my middle name. It was something, indeed it is a habit, but it was not set in stone. Because frankly, if our minds are set in stone, we can never learn a single thing. And I find this rather fascinating. We know very well that you can have zero, say, intellectual knowledge about something like music, for example. You wouldn't have never heard even of F major, let's say. But we know our minds are so flexible, we can learn it after a few years and become a genius musician. So that's called changing your mind. It means your mind's not set in stone. It's fairly obvious. But it's kind of ironic and rather bizarre, actually, that we think emotions are set in stone. Because they feel so intuitive, don't they? They feel so powerful. But they're all part of our mind, Buddha says. So if you can change your intellect, you can change your emotions as well. But the key point for the Buddha with emotions, like I said, we only notice the anger when it's full-blown vomiting out the mouth. Eyes wide in horror, tears coming out, irrational words vomiting out the mouth. Oh, she must be angry, we'll say. We see an emotion fully blown, isn't it? That's only when we tend to notice it. But when we really begin to work on our minds, this is the Buddha's approach, then you're practicing every day a little bit of concentration, meditation, you're stepping out of your head for a few moments in the morning maybe, then you start to develop this skill to observe the thoughts, the angry thoughts deeper down that are already there as a tendency, and that aren't really fully blown until some serious thing happens. But you're starting to notice these thoughts more. And then as we're practicing, we learn to hear all these stories in our head, and we can start to reconfigure them before they explode out the mouth. That's really what daily practice is. That's the business of harnessing the craziness. And it's an intensely difficult job. But the first step in any job has to be you want to do it. You can't be forced. And that's massive, because already we completely believe that it's everybody else's fault why I'm angry. It is not my fault. And ego will frantically try to get ourselves off the hook, because we want to feel that we're entitled to be angry, entitled to be jealous, entitled to be depressed. This sounds kind of cruel, but that's the irony of ego. It's kind of, we can't bear the pain of it, so we have to find something out there. That's why I'm angry. It's not my fault. So this is quite intense what Buddha's saying. He's not blaming us. He just says, no, we're really preventing ourselves from doing the job. That even though there are terrible things happening out there, I can change this one, no matter what. I can change this one. But you have to want to do it. That woman, for me, it blows my mind, her response, And I read about her later that she's finally got out of prison, thank goodness. Husband was dead, executed, lost the kids. And then what happened was, she went to Ireland, apparently, and I read since in a podcast on the BBC. She went to Ireland and met for an Amnesty International conference, and then she met some Irish fellow who'd also been accused of murdering 2 police in Britain during the Troubles, in Ireland during the Troubles, and he was accused of that as well. And he also did yoga in prison, and then they met and fell in love, and now they're living in near Cork, running a retreat centre to help people who've been through the suffering of being wrongly accused. These dear, dear, dear people. I'm so happy for both of them. Somehow they've had a happy ending to their lives after that nightmare. Any questions? Good to have conversations. I like it when people ask questions and we can go in different directions. So who has questions? Yes, sweetheart, you good. Microphone, yeah, at the back there. Just here, at the back. The lady at the back, right at the back. Oh, right at the back. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
Hi there, my name's Amy.
Hello, Amy.
I just wanted to ask, I guess around childhood trauma.
Yes.
I'm also a recovering alcoholic and addict, and I have complex PTSD from childhood trauma. And I've been in recovery for about a year now, and I've been practicing some Buddhism and meditation. And I guess I just wonder, I guess there's a real struggle at times, and I don't know how much you know about that, but certainly mindfulness and meditation is recommended as part of recovery. And,
I understand, darling.
I guess there's times where it's really difficult, for people who don't know, the treatment for a lot of alcoholism and addiction is usually drugs and alcohol. It certainly helps with repressing all the pain and the difficult stuff, and I've found certainly once you stop those things, all that stuff comes up, and some days and weeks, and it can go on.
I understand. So what's your question,
crippling,
darling? Amy,
so
what's
I
your
guess
question?
the hard part is in practicing meditation and Buddhism.
But I'm not talking about meditation here, am I? I didn't mention the word, did I?
What does that look like, and how do you continue to access that and manage the dark days when you can't? It's hard to get out of bed, and depression takes over.
So then, okay, so in the end, what we're trying to do is find a way to interpret our experiences. So clearly, you are interpreting it according to the materialist, Western, philosophical, materialist model of the mind, aren't you? I'm not being rude here. I'm just trying to give it a place.
Yeah, I'm trying
You're
to
not describing it from the Buddhist point of view at all. I'm describing things from the Buddhist point of view. So did you hear me give it? I understand your question, Amy, and it's really perfect. So let's see if we can reframe your question using Buddhist philosophy.
Yeah,
so did you hear what I said? Now keep the microphone, darling. It's good. Did you hear what I said about that woman in prison?
Yes.
Would you say that was quite traumatic?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then you'd give names like what you just said then. What are those words you use for trauma? PS what?
Complex PTSD.
Thank you. So then if she too, she's been through traumas, hasn't she? Quite intense. Husband executed, children gone. Yeah. But did you hear when I talked, I didn't present it like you presented it. I'm not trying to be rude here. What I'm saying is we all have different models of mind, different models of health, have different ways of presenting a problem. Would you agree with that? What I've done is I'm describing the Buddhist approach to a problem and therefore the solution. So the Buddhist approach to your giving an example, and we've all got some kind of suffering. Every one of us has some kind of childhood trauma, perhaps. Do you agree with that? Some of us have got some kind of addictions. Would you agree in general with that? Each of us is different, and there are different levels. You accept that, wouldn't you? Okay. So if I think of my own self and my childhood trauma, I understand, for me, taking the Buddhist view of it, forget all the Buddhist view about karma. It's not a discussion here tonight, but looking at it from the psychological point of view, what that means is, what Buddhist view is, for me to become intimately and deeply familiar with these old habits that I've developed in this life, called anger, called hurt, called resentment, use those words that you called. But I would suggest these words I'm using in Buddhism cover all of that. They're just the words we use in the West, So part of the process of becoming this human being that Buddha suggests we can is by owning the states of mind. So they're called attachment, they're called anger, they're called grief, they're called loss, they're called resentment, jealousy, fear. Would you agree, roughly speaking?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So dealing with those parts of our mind every day, hearing those conceptual stories, working with those conceptual stories, and knowing that we can change those stories that interpret our past. So that's really the job I'm describing. And that is what the job is every single day for every one of us. And naturally, because we have all got traumas, all the words you're using, we've all got something. Would you accept that as a possibility?
Yes,
so then
definitely.
it's learning to, also I would put it this way, to learn to distinguish between the external event and our mind. Our response to it, or even our interpretation of it. Because anger is a response. Let's say anger, for example. I'm not saying yours or anything, but using it as an example. And that would have been my tendency as a kid to things that happened in my childhood. Yes. I would have anger to it. Another one of my sisters would become anorexic instead. Another sister became catatonic. Another sister got asthma. We each have our own ways of interpreting a situation and responding to things according to what's in here, isn't it? Yes. So the Buddha's emphasis is it's good to remember the past things. That can help us become familiar with this, because that's the one we're working with. That is the one we're working with. That these viewpoints, these opinions, these old habits, these fears, these dramas, becoming familiar with these every day. So that's the job. It seems to me you're doing the job. And it's not that easy. And we will fall down, so we pick ourselves up and keep moving. And we'll fall down again, and we pick ourselves up and we keep moving. When we have confidence, even theoretically, that our mind is not set in stone, and there is no trauma, and there is no fear, and no drama, and no external event that we can't go beyond. And can't face when we're ready, one step at a time. I don't know if that answers anything you're saying, but that's the Buddhist approach. This is the approach I'm trying to use in my own life. And this is a way of using Buddhism to describe the approach.
Yeah.
Does it give you any satisfaction to hear what I'm saying? Or
no, definitely. I guess I just wondered what that daily practice looks like.
Could be a million things. It might be doing a bit of breathing meditation. It might not be. We've all got different personalities, Amy. For me, I always talk and I joke about it. That when you can see I'm kind of a speedy person, right? And a volatile. Can you see that? My nature, volatile and speedy. So you can imagine me being very angry when I was a kid, right? So another one of my sisters maybe suppressed things that went on. One of my sisters, we joke actually, she was always the pacifier. She would do everything in her power. If Daddy was coming home at 8 o'clock, she'll make sure that she got Mummy in that room and Robina in this room, because Robina's a troublemaker, and we don't want to upset Mummy. I'll get Nanny over there, and I'll get Daddy into his bed and make sure that he doesn't see anybody so there won't be a fight. Whereas I didn't care. If there's a fight, there's a fight, and I'd jump in the middle. Yeah. So we've all got our own ways of dealing with what happens. And hers was, and she'd get asthma. She would do everything in her power to control it all, to not upset the apple cart. She would help everybody. She'd make it, because she couldn't cope with the distress. Whereas I didn't mind if there was a bit of chaos. I mean, I'm sure I did, but it didn't worry me too much. I wasn't so fearful of it. So I didn't suppress many things. Do you understand my point? We've all got our own way of dealing. So then for me, when I remember the events, and I talk to my sisters, we all talk to, we're all wonderfully harmonious and loving now. We each got our own way of presenting it, our own way of dealing with it, Yeah. But the key is, there's the event there, like that woman, that's her event. Yeah. The husband executed, being wrongly accused, all this nightmare, losing her children. So her way of dealing, she used yoga and different things. But the crucial point, what I get from those words she said, that she actually had the ability to, and this is the point, to change her interpretation of that nightmare. She called it good instead of bad. Now that's extreme, but that's outrageously radical. And how marvelous that she should do that. Yeah. Are you seeing what I'm saying? Yeah. So it really means also confronting in our own mind, as when we're ready, remembering the person and the thing that they did, and finding a new way when we're ready to eventually even forgive and have compassion, whatever it might be. And each of us works in a different way. Yeah. You can't force it. We've got to go one step at a time. Yeah. Many people have to bring up the memory first because they've suppressed it. Yeah. Some people don't suppress. I mean, I remember at some point with our daddy, not going to be too personal about my daddy, but, I always even had compassion for him. I could see he was suffering. That depends on the person, though. Depends on whether you've got much fear. It's so kind of subtle and nuanced. But the key thing is the Buddhist one, there's nothing we can't heal in here. And there's nothing. And the more eventually we have the courage to remember that thing and confront it, open the door to it, look into it, go through it without the intense fear that we might have had once, that is already a way of dissolving the pain.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you understand, darling?
Yes.
But it's just, this is life. This is called life.
Yeah.
And having the courage to do what you're doing, finding the methods. And the other one is too this, I would suggest, I'm not saying about your mind, but you have to look into your own mind. We can get very caught up in the labels of the mental illnesses we use in the West. And I'm not being negative. We can get, and almost as if, oh, well, it's not my fault. I've got PSDS or I've got depression. We can often do that because ego it's hard for us with ordinary ego to totally say, okay, it's my crazy mind, but I can handle it, honey. It's all right. Rather than, oh, I'm like this because I've got that disease. It's almost like we're getting ourselves off the hook. So it's good to have labels, but not to concretize the labels because our mind is flexible. No matter how bad life is, we can work with it according to our own pace with the help that we can get.
Yeah.
Do you understand, darling? Yeah. So having confidence in our capacity is the point. Having confidence and paying attention. So not using meditation as a way of making all the pain go away. One of our big tendencies, because we can't bear the pain, we then tend to think of meditation as an alternative to the pill. So it's a bit like the real disease is cancer, but you've got pain. So you take your pill and you think, oh, now the problem is solved. So doing mindfulness with that attitude, you're just skimming on the surface. Yeah. That's why I'd say actually the reason to do mindfulness is almost to help us uncover even more levels of this stuff that we've buried so we can learn to harness it and work with it unafraid. Yes. But according to our pace, darling, you know. Yeah. But the confidence that my mind is not set in stone, the confidence that I can radically change the way I interpret my life, my experiences and myself and everybody else is the key to it. And use every bit of help we can get. Yeah. Do you understand, darling?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Amy. Yes.
Robina, just to let you know that the Swans won.
What's happening?
The Swans won.
Oh, we did. Oh, good. Yes, I think we did. Yeah. I know.
121
good,
to 56.
I'm very happy. Now we have to play Geelong. I know. But, no, we beaten them 7 out of 9 times, so it's okay. Okay.
Hi, Robina.
Hello.
I'm thinking that we live in a society that...
Just start the sentence again, sweetie.
Oh, I'm thinking we live in a society that encourages us to treasure our delusions and feed them, and there is a certain pleasure from that.
Yes, it's true.
Even a bliss in a delusional state. How do you differentiate the blissful feeling of getting that control?
Well, darling, can you say it in another way? I'm a bit puzzled. Ask me in a more simple way. It sounds a bit complex.
Life can be pretty good even if you're not doing this journey.
Okay, good. Yes, we can. In other words, we can have happy experiences and we can have miserable ones. So what's the question?
You can have very happy experiences.
We can.
That are based on delusion.
Of course, it's true. So then the question is, I hear you, darling.
Yeah.
Now get to the question.
How is that
How do we distinguish?
Yeah, how do you distinguish?
Good question. Okay. The key to understanding that is to understand what Buddha means by attachment. Now, this is such a minefield because that word in our culture is used as an equivalent for a good relationship. Oh, she's really attached to her family. This is a wonderful quality. So what we've got to realize, really simply, the word Buddha uses for attachment, it's got a different definition. Now, we know, for example, you can have one word, let's say like flat. Well, we used to live in flats. Now we live in apartments. We're all Americanized. And I've noticed everybody in Australia goes to the bathroom now. I'm so shocked. We don't go to toilets anymore. Have you noticed? Everybody says bathroom. I'm blown out. Never mind. But we know, for example, if you live in a flat, but you've never heard any other definition, and then suddenly someone tells you, when Yantra tells you to play something in B flat, oh, what does she mean, B flat? Because you've only thought it was a house you live in. You'd be very confused. So you better learn the new definition, isn't it? I mean, it's really obvious. Words have different definitions. So I can't stress this one enough. It's the biggest stumbling block from understanding Buddhist psychology, period. the word attachment.